The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
Well, CJ, I had a lot of fun on Friday covering the NHL trade deadline. How did you enjoy Friday?
It was electric, man. You know, it's hard for me to compare deadlines because quite honestly, they all pass and it's just like a rush of chaos when you're kind of in the middle of it and you're just in your phone essentially trying to get little details and obviously, parse out the trades. So, I'm not actually having much perspective. I'm too close to it to say this one it's like the deadline of 2008. I just, I've been working. I wonder how many years I've been on shows. I think it's 12 to 15. I don't even know that. Point is, I've been on those deadline shows between my previous job at Sportsnet and obviously my current one at TSN for a long, long time. And so that one felt awesome though. I mean, it's just big stories that dragged on through the day, things that needed to be updated and followed and tracked and had some twists and turns. Obviously some big names moved, some sort of what I might call surprising trades, teams trading a player you wouldn't think would wear that uniform ever. It had a little bit of everything. It had great energy. And honestly, at the end of the day, I don't even think the number of trades is all that unusual. I think it's pretty consistent with what you'd expect on deadline day. But I just feel the kind of trades that were contemplated and executed, it was a lot of fun. And so I'm glad you enjoyed it. There's obviously a big trade made in the city with the team that you live in and the team that you cover day to day. But yeah, it was a cool experience. And I will say this, it's Saturday morning after the deadline. This is my favorite day of the entire season because
you're so relaxed right now.
As much as I do love the deadline, and I do, because I can appreciate that's really like a week, especially of just intense interest in our sport. For people that love the NHL, I get why the deadline period is amazing because it feels like everything's possible and there really are big decisions made and big moves made and it has repercussions that span way beyond the next 3 games on the schedule for each of these teams. So I can appreciate why why basically I just worked around the clock for a week straight. But I got to say, when it's now a year until I have to do it again, this is as good as it gets. I mean, because I love the playoffs. The off season is a different kind of demanding. It's not nearly as intense as what we just been through. And so, yeah, this is a great day on the calendar if you have Hockey Insider on your non-existent business card.
I can appreciate the fact that even if it might not have been 30 or 40 trades, the quality of trades, the quality of stories, that's what mattered on Friday. The first guy I want to get into is the biggest story that we've had to cover the last how many weeks in Mikko Rantanen. You talk about stories dragging into it. This looked like a story that looked like it was going to be resolved in the middle of the night while everyone was sleeping. And then when everyone woke up, we all realized it wasn't done. What can you say about the timeline of how Mikko Rantanen became a Dallas Star?
Well, what a crazy 6 weeks for him. Ultimately his time in Carolina lasted exactly 42 days. And, I think we were what's so funny? I don't even remember our last episode. It wasn't even that long ago, but it just tells you what a time warp it was. But so if I repeat myself, it's because I literally don't remember what we've last said. But look, the Rantanen situation went from call it a week before the deadline. It was made clear to the Hurricanes that there was going to be no negotiations on a contract. I think Carolina, they got the feeling that he just wasn't comfortable there, that it wasn't a fit. And of course, if you give something more time, there's the possibility it becomes a fit. That was always that's a door that got closed, but that's a hallway that we could have walked down and maybe it happened. But I think the Hurricanes wanted more certainty. And so, in the days leading up to the deadline, it became clear that they were looking to move him. It shifted from they're listening to offers and thinking about what they're going to do. Well, after that thought, at a certain point, it became they were even proactively calling teams and gauging the market on Rantanen. And I think by the time they ended up making the deal they made with Dallas, they found what was the best partner. And keep in mind, part of this was, I don't think Mikko Rantanen said to them, there's only 2 teams that I can be traded to. He might have made it known that there was 2 teams he'd like to be dealt to, that those teams would be the kind of teams he would negotiate an extension for. But it's a long way of saying that while Carolina talked to a lot of different teams, I think it became clear that the most likely fit was going to be with a team that could sign Rantanen, because that team was willing to part with more assets, which was going to make Carolina's initial gamble, whatever we want to call on the trade with Colorado, not look like such a bad gamble. Ultimately they get to Thursday night and they get to a point where they have the framework of that trade in place. And the last piece was a very important piece. It was a condition that the Stars could negotiate a deal with Rantanen. And I think what's important when you're going through timelines or looking at how decisions were made, the Stars didn't know as of early Thursday night, even maybe late Thursday night into Friday morning, like if there would be a fit with Rantanen. They hadn't engaged, they hadn't been given permission ahead of time while the trade was being negotiated to talk to Rantanen's agent, Andy Scott. And so basically the process of, trying to make a contract deal started when that initial, wave broke, when you're talking about, 2 a.m. Eastern time, Friday morning is, essentially when Carolina had given its blessing for those contract talks to happen. And the contract had to be completed, for a deal to happen. And so Friday morning early, if you were up, and my colleague at TSN, Darren Drager, is reporting this deal is not on, or exactly, I can't remember Darren's wording, but that was because they didn't immediately just be like, hey, we want the same thing at the contract table. Like, it was a negotiation, but it was a negotiation that had to be conducted, on Red Bull at high speed play volume, because there was the 3:00 trade deadline where it obviously had to be completed by. And so ultimately Dallas stuck to its guns. Mikko Rantanen was offered more money by the Hurricanes in dollars on paper than the deal he ended up signing. He signed a $96 million contract over 8 years, $12 million a year. The Hurricanes had offered him a deal that was in excess of $100 million. Now, those dollars aren't the same. There's tax considerations. And so his take-home pay, I'm not saying he left money on the table, but in terms of, you're just looking at the numbers, if we're not bringing the accountants into this, and the tax lawyers and everybody that knows more about that than I can possibly spout about, and so Rantanen, the thought all along, right, was he wanted to push for the Draisaitl deal. Draisaitl getting $14 million on his most recent extension. $12 million ends up a fair bit under it, but that's where the negotiation is happening in real time, again, against the clock. And Dallas, from my understanding, held firm on $12 million. Ultimately, he accepted it because that's a life-changing amount of money. I think it's a fair market contract. I mean, look, in the world that Mikko Rantanen was willing to play this out, he might have had to play it out as a Hurricane, I should note, but yes, play out the season and become a free agent. I certainly think he could get more than $12 million on the open market. Wouldn't get an 8th year, though, so he would only have a 7-year deal as a free agent. And so that's basically how it all went down. The negotiating of the contract, of the trade itself, I don't think was the hard part. The hard part ultimately was, getting certainty and assurance that Mikko Rantanen would sign an extension. And, he'll never forget that 6 weeks in his life. We'll probably forget eventually that he was ever a Carolina Hurricane. Like, that'll be like one of those peculiarities of history, because his tenure there lasted 13 games, sandwiched around an international break that, he came and went with barely a whisper. But fascinating set of deals. And I do think you're right. When we look at the trade deadline as a whole, I'm not even going to call it a saga. Like, I don't think there's any drama here. I think it's just a really interesting set of decisions Carolina made going back all the way to January 24th. Like, part of their calculation was he was an asset that could be traded at the deadline if things didn't work out in the meantime, right? And so they ran the gamut from making the big initial trade out of nowhere on a Friday night to an early Friday next trade to Dallas. And Now Mikko Rantanen rejoins the Central Division.
Yeah.
Could be headed to a first-round matchup against his former team because Dallas and Colorado very conceivably could meet in the first round of the playoffs. Both teams loaded up at this deadline. So all the interest and fascination doesn't end here because now there's the next chapter. How quickly does he fit in as a star? Because Mikko Rantanen's production is, you just look at the stat line, 2 goals, 6 points in 13 games in Carolina. It was not, and as we've said here before, like I know underlying numbers were good. It's not like he was terrible, but it wasn't clicking. Can it click quickly in Dallas? Can he help? Well, he's certainly going to help, but like, to what degree can he help? Can he be a difference maker? I mean, you bring in a player like that. He's now the highest paid Dallas star too.
Yes.
Like before spending 1 minute on the roster, he's making more money than everyone else who's helped build that team, right? The Stars have been to back-to-back conference finals. I'm not saying that his teammates will be jealous, but I'm just saying there's a lot of pressure in that. Like and he's been through some pressure here, and it's going to be whatever goes on from here. I think is fascinating, and this is not a typical set of NHL moves. I wonder if it's the start of a new era, both because the way the Hurricanes operate is in a different way than we've seen teams in the past in the NHL. I think this is more consistent with what we've seen in some other sports. Obviously Eric Tulsky is, we'll call him a non-traditional GM that, doesn't have the same background as a lot of his peers. And, we're also heading into it's a brave new world in the NHL, right? The cap's going up by significant margins. I think it's going to open up more possibility for different ways of thinking and operating. And I frankly welcome it.
So what did you think of how Eric Tulsky, the aforementioned Carolina Hurricanes general manager, did, getting Logan Stankoven 2 first-round picks and 2 third-round picks for Mikko Rantanen?
Well, I saw in the court of public opinion among the hockey guys, I saw a lot of people putting Carolina on their losers list, when they pick winners and losers.
Right.
Or pointing out, and I think it's factual to point out the Carolina Hurricanes on March 8th, the day after the deadline, probably have a smaller chance of winning the Stanley Cup this season than they did on March 6th when they had Mikko Rantanen on their roster, or maybe back on February 5th before they made the initial trade. Like I'm open to that line of thinking because the main player they got in that deal is Logan Stankoven, who's 22, off to a very promising start in his career. Like no red flags there, but he's not a fully developed player yet. Whereas Mikko Rantanen at 28 is a fully developed player. He's someone who has gone through all the learning curves and had lots of success in the league and is a dominant force. Might be the best playoff performer of this generation or close to it. 1.25 points per game there. Always shows up in the big moments. So that is part of this. And I'm not looking past that, but in the same sentence, if we go back to the original trade, let's just compare the original trade. They gave up Martin Necas, who, remember, had requested a trade out of Carolina last spring, and who is only signed through next year. So they gave up 1.5 years of Martin Necas. They gave up a young center in Jack Drury. They gave up a 2nd-round pick and a 4th-round pick. Mm-hmm. And they turned that into 2 first-round picks, 2 third-round picks, and Logan Stankoven, who has 5 years of team control remaining. He's an RFA after next season. And so I think if you compare what they gave up initially to what they got back, I actually think they're ahead in the big picture. But I guess your philosophy are we grading them for their opportunity to win the Stanley Cup this year, which is not past? I mean, you look at the Metro division, it's kind of a weird division. Washington, fantastic season, not taking anything away from them, but obviously, as we expected, they weren't major players at this deadline. They didn't load up. They traded for Anthony Beauvillier. They've got Ryan Leonard, one of their top prospects, or their top prospect, ready to come out of the NCAA when his season's done there. And they're just going with what they got. They to say they tinkered around the margins is maybe being generous. But they also have a team that's right up at the top of the standings this year. The Islanders got worse. They traded Brock Nelson. The Devils got worse just through poor luck, but they lost Jack Hughes for the season. Columbus, great story. They had Luke Kunin. Love this deadline. This is not a deadline for a team where Columbus is sitting to trade a bunch of draft picks and go for it. But, they're going to bet on their team. Who else am I missing in this list? I mean, the Rangers after this season, the Rangers bought and sold all year long, right? When you think about
a weird season for them.
Yeah, they traded Trouba and Lindgren off their blue line. They brought in Soucy and Borgen, who actually played together in Seattle before successfully. So I'm not even saying that's a bad set of transactions, but just an unusual set of transactions. I mean, you go down the list of guys they've traded out of town from their forward group, Kakko, VZ. Anyway, it's been a long season, but point is they've brought a lot of guys in and out. Hard to know what to make of them, but I mean, when I look at the Metro, there's an opportunity for them maybe to get back in this, make the playoffs. I know that they're kind of precarious spot in the moment, and maybe go on a run with the goaltending they have, some of the experienced players they have. Anyway, I'm getting lost in trains of thought.
No, but I wanted to
Carolina still has a chance to win the cup this year, but I think they're better set up than they would have been if they didn't make these moves.
I wanted to stick on Carolina's chances because I wasn't sure going into the deadline, even with Mikko Rantanen, if they were going to be a team that was better than Florida. Florida's might still be the best team to come out of the Eastern Conference in my eyes. I could be wrong. And after this trade, even if they had to say goodbye to Mikko, I still don't know if that's the case, but you're right. They could still come out of that division and they at least set themselves up for the future. So I'd like to think that they should still grade at least decently well. I don't know if calling them a loser is all that fair, considering the situation that they were put in and what they got out of it. Because they could have held on to Rantanen and then go through a repeat of what they went through last year with Jake Gensel and then lose. That, I think, would have put them in a loser category. A lot more fair to that versus what they ended up doing, where they ended up getting assets at the end of the day.
Exactly. And here's where, if I'm grading them, buddy, they're getting an A+.
Sure.
And if they were, I'm not a fan of any team, but if I was a fan of that team, I'm not even upset by this. I'm like, I have guys that are clearly trying to win. They made a big gamble. They made a trade initially to get Mikko Rantanen when no one else in the NHL makes that kind of trade at this point in time. And then they're really honest with themselves after trying, exceptionally hard to sign Mikko Rantanen. Rather than just do the easy thing, which in my opinion, the easy thing would be keep him as a rental, hope it works out, hope. Maybe you lose in round 2 again, and then he leaves for nothing. Maybe you trade his rights at the draft for a 3rd round pick. So in that case, yeah, you get 6 more weeks plus the playoffs of Mikko Rantanen from where we are today, but all you recoup back is a 3rd round pick. And so then you've given up a 2nd, a 4th Natchez for a year and a half, Drury, and you get a 3rd round pick back. And what do you have? A season that didn't go anywhere. I think they did the harder thing, in my opinion, because this is very public, right? So everyone now judges it like, oh, it didn't work out. And, maybe if you want to really stretch it, like Mikko, something wrong with Raleigh. Like, I don't view it that way. I think it's more, they took a big gamble and then they made an honest set of decisions afterwards to mitigate the original decision. And I actually don't think in the big picture, they're any worse off than they would have been, quite frankly. Like Martin Natchez, he's having a great season. He's a great fit with the way the Avalanche play. Like, I'm not taking away anything him as a player, but he's been part of the Carolina teams for a long time that didn't get over the hump previously, right? Like, I think that in a smart way, they're making difficult decisions. Like, I think a lot of teams put off hard decisions and then they just go, oh shit, well, that didn't work out. Okay. I like the set of decisions. I like the critical way they approach this. And, I'm saying that while also acknowledging they're no closer today to a Stanley Cup than they might have been. But, now we go into an off season. They've got tons of cap space. They've got extra draft capital to make further trades. Like, it's not like they're necessarily using those picks to pick. And I just think that they have a lot going for them moving forward in terms of how they're going to build out their team. And I think they're going to continue to be aggressive. Like, I bet Carolina's takeaway from this is like, let's do more of this. This was a cool, I think as much as I'm sure it was stressful, down to the wire, emotional, all those things. I think that their takeaway should be like, hey, like we can we can operate in ways other teams aren't, and we're gonna end up in a good spot in the long run.
And if it means it's going to get us good young talent that's going to extend our contention window, in addition to draft picks, which fine, maybe from Dallas's end, those draft picks might not be, you're not thinking like top 10 picks or top 15 picks, but the first round pick's a first round pick. You take it. Like, I don't know about you. I kind of like the way that the Carolina Hurricanes are operating, and I don't think they're a loser in any way for how they handled it. Disappointing you can't keep Mikko Rantanen, but at least you got something for him.
I know we're sitting on this topic a long time, but it's a big topic.
It's a really big topic.
Rewind to
there's another thing I want to get to that too.
I was going to say, let's rewind to their season even before the Rantanen deal. They had identified that they need a superstar, like at least one. Like they know that they're a superstar short. They were involved in the conversations, remember, on JT Miller with Vancouver, on Elias Pettersson. Ultimately didn't make those trades. But those come out of the fact that they recognize they need that player. Guess how they're going to get that player? Perhaps in free agency, perhaps, but they now you're getting that player by trading a bunch of draft capital. They now have more draft capital to get that player. Now I realize it's not in time for the 24-25 NHL season, but I think that I should say this. We are in for a wild offseason in the league this year. Like I think June and July could be insane. Right now, we're basically like a guy or girl who's on a wild run at the casino where everything is hitting. Like the Four Nations was awesome. The trade deadline was awesome. I think the postseason set of moves is going to be like really compelling, full of lots of holy shit moments. And let's just hope the Stanley Cup playoffs deliver like they always do. I mean, if you love this sport, like we are on like a heater right now. So let's keep it going. Anyway, that just sets up the point that I think that there will be opportunities for Carolina to get that superstar in the months ahead. And they've already shown they're going to be creative about finding ways to do it. They're going to be open-minded. They're going to think about making trades that maybe on the surface you might have to think about it a little bit. They get full grades for me on the way that they've operated this season, and let's see what happens next. Yeah.
So yeah, Carolina grades out well. Love the move for Dallas, obviously. The extension money, when you lump in the fact that there's no state tax in Texas, it makes the fact that Rantanen's only getting $96 million a little bit more palatable. I mean, yes, only. I get it in the context of what we're talking about here. I guess just initially my first thought was, you signed for $96 million when all along, maybe you could have signed that deal in Colorado, but I don't have a in-depth knowledge of what Colorado state taxes are. He probably would have had to take home a lot less of that.
And sorry, yesterday was a blur, so I don't know who tweeted this. I think someone said that he would take home $4 million less over the life of the contract in Colorado on that same deal. I think I saw that. So I'm not quoting that as fact, but I think that that's the equation. But look, he didn't expect to get traded from Colorado. I mean,
no.
The truth is my understanding is he just never engaged in deep negotiations in Colorado. And ultimately the team took that to be like, we're worried about leaving this up in the air, and they made their decision. So look, everyone might end up ahead, except only one team is going to be able to play past, into the third or fourth round, probably. Actually, I guess we can guarantee pretty much only one of those teams gets to the third round.
Yeah.
By virtue of the division playoffs and the fact that neither of them are going to win the division, I don't think. So.
Right. Okay. One last Mikko Rantanen question. Unless there's something else you have to, get off your chest. But I have one more Mikko Rantanen question. How close were the Leafs in on trying to land him from Carolina?
Well, let me rewind the tape a bit, and I'm going to answer that question, but I'm going to say something else first. When we were talking about Mikko Rantanen's contract, and you'll follow my line of thinking here. It's not that advanced. But with Mikko Rantanen, the biggest winner in him signing that deal at the deadline, other than him and his family, is Mitch Marner. Because Mitch Marner is now the number one, without question, free agent set to potentially be available on July 1st. And so I don't think Mikko Rantanen's number necessarily affects Mitch Marner. I mean, certainly he's got a better points per game and all those things. Like when teams do those evaluations, when you're looking for comparables, it's basically what negotiations are built on. You might argue that Mitch Marner doesn't deserve to surpass Mikko Rantanen's contract. But the one big, huge screaming caveat here is Mitch Marner might be on the open market. And when you're on the open market and you're available to 32 different potential employers, you're worth whatever someone says you're worth. It doesn't matter what any other player in the league makes. And at a time when the salary cap is about to explode, in a season where, frankly, Mitch Marner has even exploded a little more than he has in the past. And listen, he's been a consistently high-performing player. He's been nominated for a Selke Trophy. He's been a top point producer from pretty much the minute he entered the league, but certainly the last number of years. He's in a tremendous position with leverage to, it's not just about picking a destination, but to reset the bar for what top offensive players make in the league. And so that bleeds into your question about the Leafs and Rantanen. What happened in the lead up to this deadline is that it became clear to the Leafs that Mitch Marner wasn't going to negotiate an extension with them prior to the deadline. Like they weren't going to get the certainty that Mitch Marner was going to be a Leaf long term. That's not the same thing, and I really have to underline this. It's not to say he won't still be a Maple Leaf beyond the season. That's in the realm of conversation possibility still. But Mitch Marner didn't want to give up the chance to potentially peak at free agency by signing a contract now. And so the Leafs have to start considering what their future looks like without Mitch Marner. Like that's the natural conclusion of that set of decisions. I mean, Mitch didn't want to negotiate with the Leafs. And he still said he wants to be in Toronto. Like two things can be true at once. Like this story has a lot of nuance, and I'm worried about getting radioed by one piece of it. But I do think the nuance is important here. Mitch has earned the ability, and he's performed at a level that he can do something like what top NHL player in his prime goes to free agency? The last one might be John Tavares. Like the last comparable to what this situation is now trending towards being. Right. And so, Mitch Marner has decided that he wants to ride this through. He wants to, like, as much as we've talked through the season, like the Leafs want to see the playoffs before signing Mitch. He wants to see the playoffs before signing in Toronto or thinking about it. And my understanding is there's tons of conversations that go on with the Leafs and Marner's camp. I don't think there were really any negotiations. Like at this point, I think Mitch is, communicated to the Leafs, like, I'm not ready to think about those contracts. It's not like he's turning down offers in an official way. He didn't engage. You know what I'm saying? Like they didn't sit down and you say, I want to pay you 8 and I'm saying I want 12 and you split the difference or whatever. Those aren't real numbers with Mitch Marner. I'm just
not real numbers. Not real numbers.
Merely making a point. Well, there's no point in getting into numbers. He hasn't there's no numbers. The numbers aren't there. I'm sure the Leafs said, hey, we would do something like this, but they might have even made an offer. But Mitch's side has said, we're not ready to negotiate. And so, he's in a really compelling position now because, and so that's put the Leafs now have that information ahead of the deadline. Well, what do? First of all, this was a go for it year for Toronto. They had first round picks in 26, 27 beyond, second rounder in 25. They didn't trade that in the end. They have some prospects that a lot of teams like in Fraser Minton, Easton Cowan, Ben Danford. Minton obviously ends up going to Boston in a deal we'll talk about in a bit. But the Leafs had that sort of capital to deal from, and they were looking around for the best possible options. And among those options was Mikko Rantanen. And so, yes, the Leafs had, I think that there was a wave of different conversations with Carolina. Like, I think that there was different possibilities put on the table for what a trade could look like, including right up until, before he ended up becoming a conditional Dallas Star on that negotiation. By the end, it seemed that Carolina's, if you want to liken it to the deal they got from Dallas, I think Matthew Nyes was the Stankoven in that deal. And then you're looking at all the draft capital beyond that. Perhaps one of Toronto's other prospects was involved. That I don't have confirmation on that, but that's the framework of what the deal could have been at the end. I think that there was an earlier version where, hey, would you flip Marner for Rantanen? But Mitch Marner has a no movement clause.
Yeah.
So that never happened. And so, basically the Leafs were in on Rantanen because they have to start imagining what the future could look like without Marner. And the crazy thing about all this is there's still a world where Mitch Marner just signs a big money extension in Toronto at the end of all this. But he's got leverage and he's going to use it. I mean, that's how it is. He's earned that. Like this isn't about good and evil, or anything like that. This is straight up. This guy is a top level talent in the league, having an awesome season, and he's got the contractual rights to shop himself to the whole league as of July 1st. And it looks like right now that's how this is going to play out.
Marner for Rantanen would have been the holy shit of holy shits of trades on deadline day. Like a 1-for-1 superstar caliber for superstar caliber player swapped for each other, both of them pending UFAs. Holy shit. I'm just processing that now. That's crazy. And
do you know what's crazy? These guys have had mirroring careers in the sense that they're same stage of their careers, same year, like they both signed 6-year second contracts. The difference was Mikko Rantanen didn't get full no move protection in his second deal when he was eligible for it. Mitch Marner did. And so Mikko was blindsided by that initial trade from Colorado. Colorado got to the point where they weren't sure they could sign Mikko before the deadline because Mikko wouldn't engage in contract talks. So they decided to trade him. The Leafs didn't have that ability, right? Mitch Marner had a no movement clause. The Leafs couldn't send him to some other place and be like, hey, you're not negotiating. We got to make our decisions. And so that was the key difference. And that's why it's so funny. That's why players fight hard to get those no movement clauses, even modified no trades. Like it gives them some control of their future, because I do think there's a world it's not a very productive way for us to get in this conversation, but there's a world that if Mitch Marner didn't have that trade protection, I think that trade happened. Like, I think if everything else was the same, except for he didn't have the no move clause, I think they probably make that move and try with Mikko. Right. And so anyway, it's what a deadline. And then as my original point is, no one benefits more with Rantanen signing than Marner, because there are so many comparables there. Like if they both hit July 1st on the same day, obviously lots of teams will be bidding for both. It might muddy the waters. This is now this is set up to be an auction. This is just set up like, hey, and at a time when all you teams are getting $8 million more in cap space, or $7 million more in cap space, and there's lots of teams out there I know that need a superstar. Who wants to pay what for me? What kind of lifestyle can you give my family? What kind of opportunity can you offer me? Chicago, you need a superstar. What does that look like?
I've said Chicago. I've linked Chicago to Marner since that live show in Coburg. I said Chicago. I want that known.
There you go. I'm not saying it's Chicago, but I'm just saying, Carolina, you need your star. Hey, Vegas, you always need a star. You
always
got all the stars.
You're always rolling the dice.
You want one more star. Hey, Florida teams, like you got a great place to live. You're competitive.
We'll get Florida in a second.
No, but I'm saying, look, I haven't done the numbers. Like I haven't looked at this closely, but off the top of my head, I do know that Sam Bennett and Aaron Ekblad are both UFAs in Florida. Like the Panthers probably have some cap space if they want to go for Marner. I'm not saying they do. Just this is the opportunities, though. This is that Mitch is unlocking by potentially going to July 1st. And so the stakes are so high for Mitch. Obviously, they have been all season. Look, he's performed without this guarantee. He's having his best offensive year. He made the play that helped Canada score the Mick Golden goal at the Four Nations.
That's what we're calling it, the Mick Golden goal.
No, I don't know. I saw someone call it that. And I
thought it was kind of unique. Do we have a sponsorship with McDonald's or something that I didn't know about?
No, well, you already saw the McDonald's that have been renamed McDavid's in a few places.
I did see that. Yes.
I don't think anyone else is. I don't think anyone's truly calling it that. I just saw it referred to that, and I was like, that's kind of unique. Anyway, Marner's had a great year. He's earned this, and man, we've spent like 30 something minutes and talked about one trade and then one fallout of the trade that didn't happen.
I was wondering if you wanted to segue into the Leafs day, since we went down the Mitch Marner hallway, and it's not going to be the last time we enter that zone. And there's a part of me purely for the story, that wants the Marner story to extend into July 1st. So that way we can all see just like the options available to him, the money possibilities for him. Like, you talk about the craziness that could happen in an NHL season on the ice, off the ice. That's right up there if it gets to that point.
If you're looking at it, the most likely option right now is Mitch Marner becoming a free agent on July 1st. That's the most likely option. Players typically don't sign after the deadline with their own teams until the offseason, like until they're eliminated from the playoffs, essentially.
Right.
So the next window of opportunity truly for the Leafs to negotiate with Marner will be once the season is done. Now they're hoping that's like, they're hoping they go to Game 7 of the Cup final. Wasn't Game 7 of the Cup final last year like June 23rd?
It was like super late in the year.
My point is, the Leafs are hoping it's not until June 23rd that they're even having that next conversation, because it means they're playing for a Stanley Cup. But that's the next window now for the Leafs to try to sign Marner. And if you're Marner, I guess unless they're truly overpaying, or if you just get maybe like, here's the thing. I think we have to remember this isn't all big, as much as this isn't all set in stone, 100% going to happen. You're dealing with a very important decision for a man, for his family. Like, Marner could have a change of heart between now and July 1st and decide in the end he doesn't want to go there. But my point is this: the most likely outcome, in my view, right now is that he becomes a free agent, because he's put himself on that track now. He didn't even engage with the Leafs on contract talks. So, like, he has set himself up to where he's earned that right in every way, shape, and form to do it. And so, unless after the season the Leafs offer him something he can't refuse, or maybe again his heartstrings are pulling at him, maybe they get close to the playoffs and don't get, like, we can game theory this all kinds of ways. But I think ultimately the most likely conclusion to this is that he tests for agency, and then I don't know what happens. I mean, it's happened before where guys even get to almost free agency and still sign with their original team. I mean, remember Steven Stamkos, when he was in his prime, signed an extension with Tampa on like June 29th. Like, that could even happen, where he gets close to it and he's thinking about it and then he pivots back. Like, it's hard to say, you know, there's just all kinds of possibilities there, but they're sitting right in front of them. Do you know what we should do? Sorry, I'm all over the place.
That's okay. That's okay. Go off.
But I was going to say, we should talk about Toronto and Boston's days together, because these franchises are always, well, in the sense that the franchises are always linked. You know, they've played all these playoff series over the years, and for the first time in a really long time, they're going in different directions. And they're going in such different directions that one of the unthinkable happens. For the first time since 2011, the Bruins and the Leafs made a trade. And to me, that trade is the most significant thing the Leafs did individually on this day, in getting Brandon Carlo from the Bruins. You know, it's funny. I did a list with Jonas Siegel, our colleague at The Athletic, I think in January. It was, anyway, 8 weeks ago. And we were like, who are the best defense targets for the Leafs? And we had Carlo at number 2. And the only reason he was at number 2 is because we basically said, like, I don't think these teams would ever make this deal. Like, it makes sense for both of them. It makes sense for the Bruins to be looking at a bit of a rebuild now, or retool on the fly, whatever we're calling it. It makes sense to trade a player like Carlo at this stage of his career, because there's a chance it gets worse rather than better, and he becomes more of a diminished asset. It makes sense for the Leafs to take those risks on by trading for a 28-year-old 6'5" right shot D. I mean, for those that cover the Leafs on a daily basis, we've been talking about the need for a right shot D, like, without end for 10 years on end. I think now, finally, after getting Tanev and Carlo, like, I'm not saying they'll never need someone who can play the right side beyond that, but, like, they don't really need a right shot D. I mean, Tanev signed a long-term deal. Carlo signed for 2 years after this one. I mean, that's their top 4 on the right side, set in stone for the foreseeable future.
They look good on that side, especially with those two players.
Dude, look at their blue line since Brad Treliving took over. I mean, they've added the only holdovers, I guess, because Jake McCabe was a trade that was made by Kyle Dubas before Brad was hired, and obviously Morgan Riley, longest serving Leaf. But beyond that, the entire blue line's been remade. And yeah, they have depth back there. They look much better, to my eyes, prepared to match up in a tough playoff series with top level competition, which, if you're in the Atlantic Division, you have to be thinking about. You know, the stakes for the Leafs to win the division have never been higher, in my opinion. Avoiding Tampa and Florida in round 1 is an imperative for this team. It's not to say they can't beat both in the same playoff year, but that's a tall ask for any of those teams. But there's a world if the Leafs win the division that Tampa, Florida play round one. If Toronto gets through whoever they face in the wild card matchup, then they face that only one of those two Florida teams in the next round. So the Carlo deal, I mean, look, the Brad Treliving put he didn't trade those two first round picks plus to get Rantanen. He did trade 2 first round picks to get Scott Laughton from Philadelphia and Brandon Carlo to address some needs on the team. I think what's key here for me from the Leafs end of those deals is both those players have term. So he didn't give those up on rental players. And, both have retained salary in their deals. So Scott Laughton is now a $1.5 million player for the Leafs next season. Pretty good value for Toronto, especially in a rising cap environment. They're not filling all their holes on July 1st. Mitch Marner is going to secure the bag on July 1st, but every free agent beneath him on the list is going to be looking for more than what those that came before him were paid, simply because there's more money in the system. Like it's a supply demand issue. And then they get Carlo with 15% retention, brings him into the $3 million as a D. I think that's a third pairing D in the NHL by pay rate. And the Leafs are going to hope for this year and next, I would think, that he's at least a second pairing guy for them. So they got value back for giving up a fair bit of value, which is Fraser Minton, who the Leafs 100% believe is going to be an NHL player as soon as next season. He's played NHL games this season in Boston, where they're doing a full rebuild. Minton might be playing the rest of the year as a Bruin, right? I mean, so they gave up a young NHL player and 2 first round picks, plus Nikita Grabenkin, who's more of an energy type beauty, but he went to Philadelphia. Him and Mitchkoff
forecheck, paycheck. I'm going to miss
exactly. Well, you're not going to miss it. You're going to see it on full display in Philly. I mean, he actually is like a flyer. Like when I think about it, like what a fit of team, seeing that guy out there in the orange, giving crazy interviews. Him and Mitchkoff apparently have a pass too, so that there's some comfort level there.
So after all that, the Flyers had Andrei Kuzmenko, they moved him to LA. All 3 of those guys together would have been fun, but we can't.
Right, but Kuzmenko's older, right? Like Grabenkin and Mitchkoff are peers, and obviously Philadelphia wants to get younger. So I think for the Leafs, I think that's a good deadline day because they gave up a lot, sure, but they gave up the things they should be giving up. I love the attitude about that. I think their team is certainly better now. There's more options. Didn't mention, but for cap purposes, they traded out Connor Dewar and Connor Timmins in a separate deal with Pittsburgh. So that's all part of basically those guys were going to be pushed out of the lineup anyway with the additions, but also the Leafs needed those moves to be made for cap purposes. I think that's a good day for the Leafs. I think it doesn't come with certainty, but that's if you're a Leafs fan, that's the kind of deadline you wanted. Brandon Carlo and Scott Laughton, I will accept. They're not headline type players, but they're winning type players. They're players that do the things that you need to do to be successful as a team. The Leafs just added 2 guys that are a clear upgrade on what they had at those positions in the lineup. They sacrificed some future for it. That's what you should do to try to win now. Those guys aren't just leaving as free agents on July 1st. They're going to be part of the team next year unless there's further trades. But my point is the Leafs have control of them. And at I think very fair cap numbers. That's good business any way you slice it. And, start the playoffs tomorrow. Like that's not just in Toronto, but I just like seeing all this, like as I start to think about it, like it's really, I think, an intriguing set of decisions. And I think that was the way the Leafs had to operate at the deadline. Like you might say Scott Laughton isn't enough of an upgrade for them at center. Like I'm here for that argument, but I would say as well, the Leafs have started scoring lately. I think their bigger needs, frankly, were defensively. And if they go on a long playoff run, I have said this so many times that I'm going to lose my voice over it. The Leafs going on a long playoff run. Yeah, I'm running on fumes right now.
You go with it. I love it.
The Leafs having success with this group right now, it requires Matthews, Marner, Nylander, Tavares to have big playoffs, like or 3 out of 4 of them or whatever. But the whole experiment has failed time and time again because those guys have not individually lifted the Leafs boats while making half the frickin' salary cap or more. And so as long as you have that core, and we might finally be, the litigation on the Leafs core 4 experiment might finally be coming to an end here in the near future, because John Tavares is also a pending UFA. But the reason this hasn't happened for this team is they didn't score enough in enough playoff series to go on a long run, and they're built to score with those players. And so I still think as much as it'd be nice to add another scoring presence to that group, and that's why Braden Schenn in part was being coveted by the Leafs as a third line center upgrade, who was going to be more expensive. If they got Schenn, maybe they can't get Carlo with a cap. Like the cap part of that, I think the math wouldn't have worked. I don't think Scott Laughton in that context is a bad set of decisions, because they need 34, 16, and 88 in particular. They need those guys to show up and score goals and produce offense enough to win. And then they need everybody else in the lineup to be stingy as hell in those playoff series. And they have a much better blue line, I think, to do that than they did certainly last season in the playoffs.
Okay, Brad Marchand. We have to get to the other big trade that Boston made. He's a Florida Panther. Thoughts?
Unreal,
Super
man.
weird.
I mean,
yeah, just weird.
The Bruins, Don Sweeney's been their GM for 10 years. The previous 9 years, he was a pretty aggressive buyer at every deadline. Like, we're used to the Bruins being all in to win. And even though this era of Bruins teams didn't win a Stanley Cup, they got as close as you could. They got to Game 7 against St. Louis and lost. But, and they've been a fantastic, consistently great regular season team. They've won playoff series, all those things. They didn't draft enough prospects along the way, or keep enough prospects, because they were making today trades, and the bill came due. And so Don Sweeney traded 2,500 games of Bruins experience out the door with moving 5 players out the window. And the guy who played the most of those games and probably embodies what it is to be in Bruin the most of that group is Brad Marchand. And so seeing him play anywhere else would be weird, right? That would have been our conversation today had he gone west, as I think initially was the plan. But seeing him in Florida against a team the Bruins have faced twice recently in the playoffs, within the division, is going to be extra weird, I think. And it still sets up that you could have Brad Marchand across from the Leafs in a playoff series if we get a Toronto-Florida series. And really just to get to that emotional moment for Boston, I think that was a hard decision to make. And the Bruins had contract extension talks with Brad Marchand right up into this week. Right up, I'm just losing track of days, until Thursday for sure. They were still at least looking at potential options to extend him. And at the end of the day, it didn't make sense. He's 36, turning 37. If you're selling, like, it's one thing to trade Trent Frederick, as they did to Edmonton, who's a pending UFA, Justin Brazeau to Minnesota, pending UFA, guys that they probably weren't going to re-sign. But when you move Carlo and Coyle and then ultimately Brad Marchand, like 3 guys who've been there a long time, been part of all that winning, were part of the 65 win team just 2 years ago. That's a different set of emotional decisions. But if you're Boston, you finally now have players in their 20s can play on your roster. Like Fraser Minton, who is 20, probably plays for this team right away. You've got, Casey Middlestat, who they got from Colorado in the Coyle deal, age 26. Like, he joins their team now. Like, they have gotten much younger while still keeping Pasternak, McAvoy, Swayman, which are 3 pillars of what they hope is part of the next phase for this team. And they've freed up cap responsibilities in terms of things they can do moving forward. They've added more draft capital. They just made hard decisions, man. But I think the fan base in Boston was ready for it. Like, from what I've seen, there was a lot of frustration this year, and it's not just frustration with losing. I mean, no fan base likes losing. I think this thing felt like they had squeezed everything they could out of it, and so now, I think it's a risky move by Florida to a degree. Like, it's easy to come away and say, like, oh, Florida got better. Well, yeah, they got they got better players, and I love the idea of Marchand, Bennett,
Tkachuk on the same line.
But we have to operate in the moment. Like Matthew Tkachuk has a significant injury, and so when he comes back is still a bit of a question. Obviously the Panthers expect it'll be during the playoffs, but what he comes back at is a question. Brad Marchand has significant injuries to stretch. But he has a real injury. Like Don Sweeney told the reporters he's out 3 to 4 weeks. So with 6 weeks left in the regular season, you've taken a guy who has bled black and gold for his entire adult life. So that's already going to be a tough, just finding a fit. I mean, if there's anyone, I'll say this, Brad Marchand's personality lends itself where he could walk into any dressing room and become comfortable because he's just that kind of guy, right? Like you saw him with the Team Canada behind the scenes videos, like he chirps and he knows how to fit in with the boys. So like, I think at least with that player, you feel good that he'll find his way pretty quickly, but it's going to be weird for him. And he doesn't get to play for the next 3 to 4 weeks. So, that's why there was that condition on the pick. It was a 2nd round pick to Boston, where if Marchand plays half the playoff games basically in the first 2 rounds, or 25% in round 1 and 25 or something like that. Anyway, the point is if he's healthy and he plays and they play into the 2nd round, it becomes a 1st round pick because Florida had to build in that protection because there's a world that this Marchand trade, I'm wishing him health and I'm wishing them a long playoff run, but there's a world where he plays like 10 games for Boston or for Florida after this trade because their season could be done quickly and he might not be ready to play enough soon. So there's a lot of risk in this deal in my eyes for the Panthers, but there wasn't that much risk for Boston at this point other than maybe in their own market. People are like, well, why do we watch the Bruins now? I mean, like that could be fair, but they're, they got younger, they got more draft capital and it probably was time. Like doubling, tripling, quadrupling down at a certain point doesn't make sense when you see the league moving in a certain direction and they didn't have the next wave coming. And now they've started moving towards getting where the next wave could come from.
Still, it's going to take me a while to get adjusted when he's healthy enough to play to see Brad Marchand in a Florida Panthers jersey.
Dude, the rat playing where they throw rats on the ice.
Literally.
Like it does make some sense.
Yeah.
And I think, a big part of that trade too is the Bruins. They didn't get a list of specific teams, but they knew the kind of places Brad wanted to play. Like they wanted to do right by their captain here. He only had an 8-team no trade list, but I think that they weren't just going to send him anywhere. And so, ultimately there were discussions out west. There was feeling, it might work in Colorado. This is before the Avalanche made the deals they made. Some thought maybe LA or Vegas. I think Vegas's interest was muted, but they thought about it. And ultimately ends up in Florida.
I hate to double back into the Leafs conversation. I love it for engagement. But with Scott Laughton ending up being the guy that the Leafs ended up getting, when exactly did the Leafs kind of pivot from Brayden Schenn to Laughton? When did that happen? Again, sorry to double back, but I just wanted to add that.
Well, I think the Leafs were in on Brock Nelson too. So to double back, on Thursday, the day before the deadline, the Leafs were still considering Brayden Schenn, still considering Brock Nelson. They never got to a point where, I think Brock Nelson really wanted to go to Colorado, but he gets traded late Thursday night to Colorado. So that takes a center off the board. And then ultimately, I believe the Leafs didn't believe that St. Louis wanted to trade Brayden Schenn. Schenn is still under contract for 3 more seasons. He's their captain. The Blues have gone on a really nice run here. Now they got some bad news. Colton Parayko is going to be out at least 6 weeks with a knee issue. But they've been winning. And so I think that pivot happens somewhere overnight from Thursday to Friday. Brad Treliving, by the way, pulled an all-nighter. The Leafs are in Denver, so the time zones weren't in his favor, but obviously things were moving as of Thursday night into Friday morning, and the Leafs couldn't risk being left with nothing, clearly. So, that pivot happens somewhere in that time frame. But, I think Laughton was always what I would call a plan B option for Toronto. Like there was consistent talks with Philadelphia. I think the Leafs understood what they needed in the deal to make it work. Philadelphia understood that the Leafs needed some salary retention to have the trade come through. And so, and let's call it as it is. Scott Laughton's gone through some difficult family situations. He's from the GTA. His father-in-law died recently, suddenly. Scott missed games with the Flyers and talked about that with their reporters. So I'm not betraying any confidences with that, unfortunate family news. But I think it was known that he would welcome a chance to come back to Toronto. And I think Philadelphia, because he is a heart and soul guy for them, wanted to do right by him. And so, by Friday morning, that became a trade that made sense for Toronto. And then it was about, locking in what they were going to do on the blue line. It sounded like it was a real grind to get down to the deal that they got with Carlo and the Bruins. And obviously Boston had a lot of balls in the air too, but had to ultimately decide where they're going to trade Carlo, because they didn't have to move him at this deadline. But they made that decision. So, I think in the end, Schenn wasn't truly on the table. I mean, there was certainly discussions there with St. Louis, but my understanding is I don't know that the Blues wanted to move their captain, and they didn't have to with the way they've played and with the fact that, look, there's going to be if things don't go in a good direction in St. Louis, there's still opportunities down the road to see about finding Braden Schenn a new home.
So what did you think of the Brock Nelson trade? Forgive me if I'm going to start hopping around from trade to trade here as we try to get as much as we can. But
yeah, my energy's flagging.
We don't have to go through every trade, but I do want to get to Brock Nelson.
Well, I think the Islanders did well in the deal, right? I mean, Callum Ritchie's a player who played NHL games at the start of this year for Colorado, and so to get him and a first-round pick is a pretty good haul for the Islanders after Lou Lamoriello wouldn't show his hand most of the week. I think it makes sense, all kind of sense for the Colorado. I mean, what contender has actually remade itself more than the Avalanche this year with rebuilding their goaltending, making moves on the blue line? Obviously, they got Natchez and the Rantanen deal and Drury. Then they add a second line center and Brock Nelson. I mean, that team is stacked.
Mm-hmm. And they still might get dummied in the first round.
They might. They also got Charlie Coyle. Like, that's crazy. Here's a little side element. The Leafs and the Avalanche play on Saturday night. Charlie Coyle and Brandon Carlo go from being Bruins to being on both in different jerseys playing each other. Like, that's got to be weird within 24 hours. What could have been cool actually is Florida is in Boston on Tuesday. If Marchand was healthy, that would have been really crazy that his return to TD Garden in visiting colors would have come so soon. I wonder if he'll be there. Like, I wonder if they'll honor him, if he'll, I'd be curious how that shakes out. So I love what Colorado did. Like, they emptied the canister themselves, right? They're running out of draft capital, but they're doing what all the teams should do. I mean, Tampa did it with the moves it made. Toronto did it. Like, everybody, there's a lot of teams all in, and there's only one Stanley Cup to fight for. And that's what's going to make this a pretty compelling Cup tournament. And now we see, like, does Colorado get an extension done with Nelson, or does he become a July 1st player? I think he'd be in pretty high demand. He's not at Mitch Marner's career stage or at his level, but now it might set up that a lot of those teams that were trying to trade for Brock Nelson will be trying to sign him in a few months' time.
Okay, what did you think of Ottawa's day? I went into it thinking it was going to be quiet. They ended up making some decent moves.
I thought back to our Coburg show, where I went a bit off script to one of our listener questions and was like, I need to see something from this front office. Like, I need to see them make a bold set of decisions. It can't just be the predictable old. I love their approach to the trades they made. I mean, I think moving off Norris, well, obviously you saw how emotional it was. I mean, you saw it with your own eyes firsthand for Brady Tkachuk. Mm-hmm. They're close friends, the captain of the team. That's a player there's injury concerns there. And Dylan Cousins, like, if you're ever going to get Dylan Cousins, you're not going to get him under good circumstances, right? You're not going to get him in the middle of a career season. You're going to get him when he's in the position he is today, where he's not having a wonderful year in Buffalo. But you've got some certainty there. He's signed, I think, for the next 5 years. He's 23. He's big. He can lean on people. He's got hands. Like, we're past the point, and obviously he's not paid like a prospect. So we're past the point where you're drooling over the potential. Like, you need to see the results, but I still think it's a worthy bet to insert him onto your team. And you've, like Norris, if you were going to do it, you had to be getting, if you're trading a Josh Norris, you have to be getting a player back with term on his deal, because, why else would you do it? And so that's a trade I can like on both ends of the equation, because I think both teams need to do something, frankly. And then the Zetterlund deal with San Jose, that's a guy, like, I mean, first of all, I didn't think he'd be available or didn't know he was available. You never saw him on the trade board. I'll celebrate my wins, but also celebrate my losses, because I didn't hear his name in the run up.
It was a surprise to many of us.
Right. And they're giving up a draft pick there. Obviously Noah Gregor, they have to make the money work, but I think it's an upgrade for the Senators. And I like to see them taking some swings in the batter's box there. Honestly, I mean, there's a world where we look back on this Cousins trade and we're like, wow, can you believe that they ever got that guy via trade? Like, I think he could still be that good. I might be biased a little bit. I saw him at the World Championships last year for Canada, and he was a dominant force in that tournament, killed penalties, scored a bunch of goals. Like, he was a really, really good player. And so, it's a fresh start for him. And, it's the clarity of the team and the front office's intentions can't be questioned, right? I mean, what did you think? I mean, you're digging into this, the personalities, you have a feel on the ground. I mean, what's the feeling?
I thought it was a good day for Steve Staios. Like, and when I say that I expected this deadline to be quiet for them, like, yes, that was a gut feel for months, but like digging into it myself, like that seemed like it was going to be the case. And even Steve Staios, the GM over there in Ottawa, acknowledged as much, that it was looking like it was going to trend that way. They had some irons in the fire on Thursday night that didn't work out. And then Friday morning, this opportunity comes to get Dylan Cousins, and all the qualities you're describing from him, I think those are along the same attributes that Steve Staios liked. And it meant having to trade from that core, but also if we're
you've added another guy to your core, right? Like you've shifted your core slightly.
Right. But to what I'm getting at here is, inevitably for the Senators to get better, they were going to have to make a move, or they were going to have to take out a guy like Josh Norris from that core. They add to their core by having to take out someone from that core, swap for swap, essentially. That's what was going to have to happen if the Senators were going to make some kind of move, and they did it. So I give them full marks for getting a guy like Dylan Cousins, who is a little younger, a little cheaper than Josh Norris. I think still has some potential to tap into. I know a lot of people have looked back at the last few seasons in Buffalo and have not been impressed, but also, sorry to Buffalo, but times have not been great there. I think that would make a lot of people's statistics kind of trend downward. I think there's still upside for him, and I think the Sens are betting on that. So I actually like that trade, and I like that they got Zetterlund out of that. And then in another deal, I should say.
And I mean, this isn't even really a prediction. It's just a statement of fact. How many players have had a career spike after leaving Buffalo? Like, it's a long list.
Eichel,
or it's a growing
Reinhart.
It's a growing list.
Yes.
I mean, even Ryan O'Reilly won a Conn Smythe trophy after, like, his stock wasn't particularly high by the end of his time with the Sabres. He talked openly with reporters about losing the love for hockey. The Sabres is a topic I think we'll leave for another day, just because whatever. Yeah. But I like what, how can you not like that move? Honestly, I mean, to get, and here's the thing, I'll say this. I'd heard a couple days before the deadline say that, certainly caught wind of some talks with Ottawa and Vancouver on Josh Norris. Certainly there definitely were discussions there where the Canucks were looking at Norris, which I thought was interesting. Harder to piece together the fit if you're unloading the Norris with what Vancouver has, what they would be bringing back. But like, I still didn't think that move it still kind of felt like Norris was maybe a summer move, if you know what I mean. Like, it still felt,
I get you.
That's why I was surprised to see it happen Friday. Cause like, clearly the Senators had got to the point where they were open to thinking about it. And look, they have a lot of depth down the middle. I think that they're in a fortunate position to consider that kind of trade, because they could look around at the market and be like, man, that's a premium position and other teams are looking for it. And so that creates some opportunity when you have, maybe, I will never say they had an excess, but they had an ability to at least think about trading from that stockpile, and they ultimately did. And, I like the move. So interesting days ahead for you. Covering is Dylan Cousins going to play? No, there's an afternoon game on Saturday. Is he in that game? Or?
So Dylan Cousins, as we were talking, a video started going around on social media of him walking around the Senators facility. My understanding is that he's available to play against the Rangers Saturday afternoon. And that goes for Dennis Gilbert as well, who was also involved in that trade.
Awesome. Well, I mean, now this is the exciting part too, right? Now the whole league gets a wave of like this guy in this uniform and how does he fit in the lineup? And then before you know it, we'll be into the playoffs. And before I know it, Julian, I'm going to be sitting with my sunglasses on the beach. So
we need a sunglasses CJ. I mean,
hey, you're gonna get him next. You're gonna get him on our next episode on Thursday. Maybe we'll do like a big ass CJ that day. We'll cover maybe trade stuff we missed, and I'll bring out the sunglasses because I will be doing that show on location from Mexico.
I already put out prompts on social media. Get your questions in, whether on Discord, whether on Twitter /X, whether on Blue Sky. Get your questions in. We'll get to them on that All Ask CJ episode to come in a couple of days. There's so much other stuff we could get to. Before we go, can you just give me like a bit of like a condensed roundup of some other winners and other notable teams you liked?
Well, I hate doing this, but I'd say Dallas is a winner. I mean,
they're
how can
obviously
you
a winner?
How can you not say Dallas is a winner? Because not only did they make a big trade, they got Rantanen to be part of the next phase, right? I mean, this is a year in Dallas where Jamie Benn's contract is up. Not saying he's necessarily leaving, but they're transitioning away from the team. You know, once upon a time it was Ben and Sagan had the big deals there, and not only did they get Rantanen in the fold, they extended Wyatt Johnston too. So that's a big piece of business done for 8 years as well. So I feel like it's one of those deadlines where they both got better in the moment and are better positioned long-term than they were heading into the deadline. So that's a clear win for me. You know, if I'm going to say a loser, maybe the Metropolitan Division. That division had more good players leaving it than coming back into it. Now, if you want to galaxy brain it, that might be a win for the division because there's opportunities now for the teams left in it, because I think there's a couple teams that got weaker in the last week or so in that division. But the Central and the Atlantic are on like steroids right now. And so off we go. There's my very brief. I mean, we could go around the league. But everybody else does that stuff. And I'm not good at it because I'm so in the weeds. Sometimes I don't see the big picture this close still to the deadline.
I think, if anything, with whatever we may still need to tackle in a spillover podcast, we could do that on the Thursday if we need to. Maybe that depends on some of the questions that we get as well. I think we covered some of the bigger stories really well. The Mitch Marner stuff in particular and Mikko Rantanen. So don't worry if we don't get to every single move that was done. I don't think we're going to be able to get to the future considerations trades that happened. There was at least one that happened on Friday.
The only thing that I'm worried about is that we might be down a few 100%ers after this episode because we're challenging the listeners to get to the end of this one.
This is why we have timestamps, sir. This is why we have timestamps. I
know, but we have 100%ers out there that listen to every show, and they might be like,
they'll be there.
CJ and Julian, we've loved you for 3+ years, but this was a bridge too far. This mountain was too high to climb. We couldn't get through this.
We had to listen to an hour after trade deadline. No. Come on. You know what you signed up for when you subscribe to the CJ Show. We'll be back with our next episode in a couple of days.
Nonsense and a little bit of info.
Sunglasses and a little bit of info. All Ask CJ episode to come. Keep it locked here for more great content. Thanks, Siege, for a great deadline. Appreciate you, buddy.
Thank you. I appreciate you. And I made it.
Bye, guys.
Do you know what was funny?
Oh, wait. Sorry. Not bye, guys. No, sorry.
You go ahead.
No,
we don't need to share.
No. You can share it. Do it.
So I have a watch that records my sleep. And it recorded the sleep I had Thursday to Friday as a nap. Because it was so short. It didn't even like register as like the full, like what like it normally gives you like your sleep cycles and stuff. It just registered that as a nap because it was 2 hours and 34 minutes. So
get yourself some sleep, sir.
That happens now.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.